America's finest.
Alright, I know this Christmas shit is incongruous with the seriousness of the topic I'm about to tackle, but maybe the dissonance will make it more memorable and help what I'm saying stick in your head. Who knows? Fingers crossed. So this vile little smegma golem, Dylann Roof, wants a race war.
Race war!
So given that, you'd have thought plenty of people would have taken to social media and to the news and to media outlets and everywhere else they could to spread a message of joy and togetherness and to reject utterly his racialized bullshit, his hatred, his incitement of race wars.
Race war!
So you would think, but no. Instead, what we see is an excuse being used of this vile little shit to talk about the evils of whiteness and how racism is the white disease and to incite race war, to stoke exactly the kinds of things that Dylann Roof wants, to make race relations worse, to blame white people collectively in the way that Dylann Roof blamed black people collectively. He considered them to be criminals and an underclass and vile and horrible, and he viewed them collectively, and that's why he went after a prayer meeting instead of drug dealers, which was his initial idea, but he was worried that they might shoot back. Humans. And here's the frustration I have in trying to talk about these issues with Americans. Americans are very parochial. Now, while it's true that America has a reasonably unique racial history and so on, I really do think, based on my analysis of the issues, of the statistics, of my education in politics and history and so on, that the modern issues that America has are not race issues. They are wealth and class issues masquerading as old racial issues. And those old racial tensions are preventing any real progress being made on these issues, because it divides the white working class and underclass from the black working class and underclass. And we also saw this in this last election with this rural-urban divide, and black people apparently live in much higher concentrations in certain areas, in urban areas, than they do in the countryside. So you also don't get people mixing as much, learning about each other as much. Ghettoization is another problem, because again, you don't get people mixing. But really, when you look at what's going on, it really leaps out at you that the vast and overwhelming majority of what's going on, the problems that we have, the disparities in justice system and treatment and so on, really mostly, not all, but mostly come down to a wealth class issue. I've banged on about this before, I'm going to wonk on about it again for a bit. Then I'm going to take a slightly different tack at the end. If you look at the raw statistics, just as when you look at the wage gap statistics, it appears as though it's, well, gender in the case of the wage gap, and race in the case of things like, you know, police shootings and imprisonments and so on. If you start controlling for other factors, then the picture starts to change. In the case of the wage gap, you look at it and you see that it's down to personal choice, careers and so on that differentiate between what people go to. And you can also look at the fact that while men earn more, women spend more. I don't want to get too far off track, but it makes a useful analogy for what we see when we look at the racial statistics. If you start controlling for wealth first, you notice that gap between the shootings of blacks, imprisonment of blacks, and shootings and imprisonment of whites rapidly changes, because black people are far more likely to be poor. There's a bunch of historical reasons, there's a bunch of economic reasons and so on for that, which you could argue are racist. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that is the majority of the disparity. If you dig down into the stats, you look at how many times higher the poverty rate in the black community is, and you look at how many times higher the police shooting rate for the black community is, you'll notice, I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to walk you through this like Teal did, I want you to go and look for yourself. But you look at those multiples, and it will leap out at you how much of a difference that makes. So these issues that we're seeing with militarized police force, the prison industrial complex and so on are being presented as racial issues. And there is a racial component, but it's much smaller than you think. The majority of what's going on is it comes down to wealth and class. That counts for redlining, that counts for the 13th Amendment loophole, and all the rest of it. You start adjusting for wealth and class, and it really leaps out at you that it's a fight against the poor, and black people are overrepresented amongst the poor. Okay, this is one aspect of it. Just looking at the stats will show you that. The American parochial viewpoint comes in because if you live elsewhere, if you live in a more racially homogenous society like I do, or you look at European states and so on, you see the same kinds of prejudice and you see the same kinds of disparity occurring not on the basis of colour. You find it definitely occurring on the basis of whether you live in a region, accent, the way you dress, very much, indicators of poverty. Now, unfortunately, skin colour is an indicator of poverty, not an absolute indicator of poverty, but Venn diagram overlap that you can't erase. You can't, learn received pronunciation English and suddenly not be black anymore. Things like that. So, unfortunately, that is an aspect. But you see these same kinds of prejudice directed towards white immigrants, the Poles in the UK, for example, or the Romanians, or whoever. You see these exact same kinds of prejudice. So it's obvious to someone outside the US that there is more going on than just purely racial prejudice on the basis of skin colour. A lot of Americans do not travel. A lot of Americans have never been outside of the US. A lot of them don't have a larger scale international political and historical viewpoint, in spite of having access to the internet. So take this on board from someone outside, someone who has a broader viewpoint, someone who has some objective distance, someone who has looked at the stats. And don't take my word for it, nullius in verba. Go and check out the stats yourself. See how much of a difference controlling for wealth and class makes to these statistics. Okay? Please, trust me. You have more in common as a poor black man and a poor white man, and you have a common enemy. You have much more in common. And a Mexican immigrant. All of you have much more in common, and all of you have the same enemy, yet you're divided against each other, fighting over scraps. Class consciousness, not race consciousness. If you want to actually get anywhere, if you want to make a big difference, okay? Lecture over. Let's move on to something a little different. Okay, let's pretend for a moment that I am a complete sociopath, unable to have empathy, unable to understand anyone's position. I've never spent any time in predominantly black neighbourhoods of London. I've never had any black friends. I've never had any friends of any other colour. I know absolutely nothing about international politics or history. Let's just wipe all that away and let's assume all your personal experience, your subjective personal experience, your lived experience is completely valid and not just an outlier. Let's just assume all that. Let's take that all absolutely as read. There's something special and unique about this that makes it completely inexplicable to historical and political analysis. All gone. You still have to persuade me. I am a white liberal person, okay? I should be automatically on your side, alright? But you still have to persuade me because you're in the minority, we're in the majority. If you want to change laws, if you want to change society, you have to persuade someone like me to come on board. And when it comes to equality, I am on board. I'm not persuaded that the issues that you're facing are entirely racial. I think there's something else going on. So, you have to persuade me otherwise. Do you think making racial identity politics the central plank of what you're doing will persuade anyone? Or do you think that making identity politics, making race the absolute centre of everything you're doing, will increase identity politics elsewhere? Are you not concerned that making racial identity so important to you will encourage others to make racial identity more important to them? Are you not worried about stoking the embers of white identity politics, the very thing you often spend a great deal of time complaining about and worrying about? Do you not think the rise in white racism, in the alternative right, in white nationalism, and ideas like white genocide might be being stoked by you making identity politics the central plank in everything? Do you not think that blaming white people collectively as a group for everything might be counterproductive? Do you think people might not shut down and stop listening if they're a completely innocent person? They don't bear the sins of their ancestors upon their shoulders. They've never done anything racist. They don't have a racist bone in their body. They've never said anything racist. But you assume immediately, just because they're white, that they are, or you even excuse yourselves from being racist due to the fact that you just happen to be of a different colour, excusing your own bigotry and racism. Do you think anyone's going to find that persuasive? Do you think burning down your neighbourhoods and killing cops is going to persuade average Joe white guy down the street? Do you? Do you think embracing it's absurd, nonsensical black supremacy ideas, which are just as absurd and nonsensical as white supremacy ideas, into your movements and allowing them to come out of the mouths of your spokespeople is a good idea? Or do you think people are going to look at the sort of Nation of Islam ideas about how white people are this mutant aberration created by some ancient evil black scientist? Do you think they're going to look at that and go, that's fucking insane and incredibly racist? Why should I be listening to these fucking racist twats? What do you think is going to persuade open-minded, reasonable, evidence-based, egalitarian people like me that your cause is valid? Is it riots? Is it shootings? Is it spouting racism? Is it making identity politics the central plank of everything you do and then acting surprised that other people's racial identity politics comes up? Is that really going to do it? Where is the common ground that you are building here? Where is it? There isn't any. And anytime anyone engages with you, tries to discuss, suggests that there might be other things going on, you just shout them down and say some blithering nonsense about whiteness and imperialism that happened generations ago. It's nothing to do with me. I didn't do it. I've never enslaved anybody. What the fuck are you talking about? I hold no responsibility for that whatsoever, and no race on earth is innocent of being a shit. Think about it. How are you going to persuade people? You're a minority. You need to persuade the majority to be on side with you. And you do that by making a clear moral and ethical case backed by evidence. You don't do it by being racist yourselves. How does that cure anything? It doesn't. Merry Christmas. Zang.